Hello! In this video I will first very quickly go over the history of psychology, and after that I will give a little bit more information about the most important schools of thought within the field. My name is Jouni Vilkka and this is my channel TFF, Teacher from Finland. Please subscribe and click the thumbs up button. The mind has been studied by philosophers since antiquity, and over time several of them have influenced our understanding of how the mind works. The so-called father of modern philosophy, René Descartes, and the German giant of philosophy, Immanuel Kant, are probably the two most significant ones. This is not to say that their views were correct, just that they were influential. Descartes is blamed for the Cartesian dualism we seem to have difficulties getting rid of. Kant's concept of schema is more useful. I will return to these later during this course. Psychology became a science of its own, separate from philosophy, in the 19th century. It is thus a very young science. The first laboratory of experimental psychology was founded by Wilhelm Wundt in Leipzig in 1879. Of course, the research done there was not quite what we would now think of as scientific, but it was a beginning. It was mostly about using introspection to examine the contents of one's own mind as objectively as possible, as well as testing abilities like reaction time. This approach to research became known as structuralism, as it tried to analyze the contents of the mind by recognizing the basic mental experiences, such as sensations, and how they combine to form complex structures of experience. Despite the effort, this method of analysis was very subjective. Across the Atlantic, the famous philosopher of religion, William James, was the first to teach psychology in the US. His emphasis was on the functions of consciousness, thus founding the school of functionalism in psychology. While the structuralists sought the elements of the mind, functionalists were interested in the operations of the whole mind. Inspired by Charles Darwin, functionalists saw the mind as the organism's tool to fit into its environment. Back in Europe, Sigmund Freud founded psychoanalysis and the psychodynamic school of thought. The emphasis in this way of thinking was in the dynamic relationships between the different strata of the mind, and the importance of the unconscious or subconscious part of it. He was especially interested in explaining what was called hysteria at the time. He also had some strange ideas about sexuality. While most of Freud's work is now considered questionable, it is undeniable that much of our minds is not conscious or available to consciousness. Freud's influence on psychotherapy lasted for decades, even after psychological research already ignored his theories. Researchers in the Soviet Union also developed psychology. Lev Vygotsky and Alexander Luria founded cultural historical psychology, which developed into sociocultural psychology. This view saw the importance of the surrounding culture to the development of the individual. Especially the field of education has been influenced by this approach to this day. Ivan Pavlov and John B. Watson, among others, wanted to make psychology a thoroughly natural science based on empirical experiments and objective observations of the subject's external behavior. Any internal experience was ignored as irrelevant, and attempts to study them were considered unscientific. This way of thinking, called behaviorism, became the most influential school of thought in psychology in the first half of the 20th century. It dominated psychological research and is still very influential. Behaviorism was especially important for the study of learning, as you will see toward the end of this course. Around the middle of the 20th century, some theories were developed to explain the differences and similarities in the personality traits of individual people. The most important of these conceptualizes personalities into the Big Five traits. This school of thought can be called the trait approach. From the 1950s onward, psychologists Abraham Maslow and Carl Rogers developed what they called a humanistic psychology. It is a therapeutic, person-centric approach based on improving self-knowledge and self-actualization. Maslow's depiction of the hierarchy of needs is even used in memes on social media. The humanistic psychologists were joined in the 1950s by the emerging new fields of study, such as computer science, linguistics, and neuroscience, leading to a cognitive revolution. From the 1960s onward, cognitive psychology rose to prominence, especially in psychological research. As the name implies, the focus is on cognition, including our abilities like awareness, perception, memory, as well as cognitive development. Cognitive behavioral therapy is based on that research. New methods and tools to study the brain and the rest of the nervous system from the last decades of the 20th century onward made possible the rise of biological psychology, which focuses on the connection between behavior and its psychological basis, especially the nervous system. Neuropsychology and evolutionary psychology are two types of biological psychology, the latter a more speculative one. Martin Seligman's positive psychology switched focus from psychological problems and disorders to strengths and optimism in a new approach to mental well-being. It has gained popularity in the 21st century. Currently, the different approaches to psychology are no longer usually seen as competitors, but rather as different viewpoints that seek to complement each other. Different types of psychotherapy are also currently used. I will now briefly describe the main points of the most important schools of thought in psychology. Freud did not invent the concept of the unconscious, but he made it popular. The idea of the psychodynamic school is that we are only conscious of a part of the contents of our minds. There are also things within the pre-conscious part of our mind which can pretty easily be brought to consciousness. But there are also things in the unconscious part of the mind of which it is much harder for us to become aware. This last part is the most important because it explains many of the problems we have. Freud emphasized the experiences of early childhood and the importance of libido, sexual desire, above all else. The three parts of the mind, psyche, according to Freud, are 1. Id, literally meaning it. The unconscious part filled with drives or instincts, desires, especially for pleasure. 2. Superego, the result of socialization and upbringing. We can only be partly aware of it all. Superego represents the values and norms adopted, especially from one's parents. 3. Ego, the mostly conscious self trying to negotiate the conflict between the demands of the two others. Repressing one's emotions and drives, according to the psychodynamic view, causes problems for the functioning of the psyche, resulting in symptoms like hysteria or various neuroses. Psychoanalysis and other psychodynamic therapies are still fairly commonly used forms of psychotherapy. They tend to require a lot of time and thus also money. Psychodynamic theories have been criticized especially for being based on a very small amount of material and for biases in the research. They have had an important effect on culture outside of psychology as well. The status of the approach within science is problematic, with many considering it complete pseudoscience. Behaviorism is connected to positivism in philosophy of science. The idea was to avoid all unscientific language, including terms like personality, thought, emotion, and so on, in favor of observable and measurable factors. Our behavior is learned, and learning can be explained with the stimulus-response model, where after the learning phase, a certain stimulus will always cause a specific response. Early behaviorists considered children to be completely malleable, like Locke's tabula rasa, empty slate. Any child could be trained to become anything. The methods of training humans were the same as with other animals: classical and operant conditioning. I will come back to those later in this series. The important contribution of behaviorism to psychology was the emphasis on strict scientific experimentation as opposed to merely conceptual and speculative theorizing. Humanistic psychologists oppose the idea of us being merely slaves to either our instinctive drives, as the psychodynamic school claims, or external stimuli, as the behaviorists claim. They emphasize the uniqueness of each individual and the meaningfulness of life experienced by them, as well as their self-actualization and development, and responsibility for their life choices. Humanistic psychology has had a significant cultural influence outside academic psychology, for example in the form of self-help literature. It can perhaps help people find their strengths and make their lives more meaningful, or to increase their creativity, but as far as I know, these claims are mostly anecdotal, not backed by scientific, even statistical evidence. In research, humanistic psychology has developed useful qualitative methods, which I will explain at the end of this series. It has also been an influence in the development of positive psychology. Brain research has increased knowledge of the functions of the different brain areas and their cooperation, various neurotransmitters, and the effects of alcohol and drugs on the brain. New tools, especially fMRI, have made it possible to study the living, functioning brain. Neuropsychology combines such research with other psychological research to build an understanding of how the mind works. For example, depression is seen as a dysfunction of the brain. Testosterone has been shown to increase aggressive behavior. The temperament is connected to certain brain structures. Like behaviorism, neuropsychology takes a purely objective or outside point of view to the subject of study. It thus cannot capture the individual's experiences and the meanings attributed to those experiences. Cognitive psychology studies our cognition, meaning our ability to perceive and think, focus our attention, solve problems, but also imagine even non-existent things. Cognitive psychology sees us as reasoning or even computing beings. There are several different cognitive theories and models, but generally speaking, while the layered structure of our minds is accepted, only a fraction of the contents of our minds is within consciousness. It is not thought that we are slaves to our desires or stimuli. Humans strive to create consistent models or schemas of the surrounding reality, and these internal models then direct their behavior. This means that those models can also be altered, for example through cognitive behavioral therapy. For example, acrophobia can be alleviated or cured by adjusting the internal models. I myself used simple exposure, not really even exposure therapy, to alleviate my own symptoms of acrophobia. The premise of evolutionary psychology is that as mankind has evolved from earlier life forms, our psychological functions have evolved as part of that process. This means they can also be understood from an evolutionary perspective, how they were useful in promoting the survival of our genes. Because all humans share the same genetic makeup, we also share the basic capabilities, such as the ability to learn a language or express emotions with facial expressions, and so on. Our species has been around for about 300,000 years, but our civilizations only developed within the past 10,000 years. The speed of cultural changes by far outpaces our biological evolution. This means we have not been able to biologically adapt to the current situation and culture we find ourselves in, but instead are biologically adapted to the kind of environment our ancestors experienced ages ago. For this reason, evolutionary psychologists don't consider conscious thinking or experience, or the surrounding culture, very important for our functioning. Evolutionary psychologists emphasize observations and measurements in the spirit of the natural sciences, but the field is very speculative and some consider it less than scientific. The sociocultural approach is the result of developments in the social sciences, especially sociology and social psychology since the 1960s. The idea is to include the influence of culture, social networks, and society in general in the explanations for human behavior. The main criticism of this approach is that it has difficulty explaining the individual differences between even the members of the same family. The trait theoretical approach seeks to find consistencies in how individuals behave. The idea is to find traits such as the Big Five personality traits: openness to new experiences, conscientiousness, extraversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. Such traits can be measured with tests administered by a psychologist, or by filling questionnaires, or by having a friend or close relative fill them. There are statistical differences between people that make the scientific use of the traits useful, but the traits do not determine behavior. Taking a personality test may increase one's self-knowledge, which may be also beneficial in itself. Until the 1990s, psychological research on mental health was focused on mental problems. Positive psychology was then invented to challenge this negative way of thinking. It turned the focus on the individual's psychological strengths as well as positive emotions like hope, compassion, love, and so on. Mental health professionals were urged to take into consideration positive emotions and mental resources. Individuals could develop themselves in positive ways instead of just trying to fix their mental defects. Positive psychology helps map one's strengths of character and to find one's own core strengths. It is possible to use mindfulness techniques to improve one's consciousness skills, for example, to learn to focus better and become more resilient to stress. Mindfulness exercises might even help alleviate depression. This has been a brief historical introduction to the different approaches to psychology, many of which are still influential today. Perhaps I left something important out, in which case don't hesitate to comment about it below. In any case, this was not meant to be an exhaustive history. Going forward, you may notice the influence of the aforementioned schools of thought in the contents of this course. I meant to start posting videos more frequently than in the past, but unfortunately I have to work, which makes it difficult to find the time required to make videos. While waiting for my next installment in this series, I suggest you check out the playlists on my channel, such as Introduction to Philosophy and Critical Thinking or Introduction to Ethics. Also, I have separate playlists for short videos, and I add more shorts to them daily. Anyway, thanks for watching. Bye! If you wish to support my channel, please click thumbs up, subscribe and share my videos. Any comments on the videos would also be welcome.